Hello, class. It's week 3 and lecture 2. I just wanted to discuss today a little bit more about the actual, procedural and the infrastructure that goes into, setting up your company. This week we're using the hypothetical organizations that you created and the potential products and services they offer to create some ads, some memorable ads or some humorous ads or whatever you want to do to kind of, showcase whatever product, service, or whatever your company's about. So, marketing is a huge piece as far as the outreach and, getting the proper placement and getting everybody on board to, as far as customers, competition, market niche, etc. But today I'd like to kind of go over more the nuts and bolts of exactly how setting up a startup would, work as far as the kind of like the steps and the coordination that you would have to do in order to get a business off the ground. So we're going to take that hypothetical look and kind of dive into it, so to speak. Now, the things that we're going to cover tonight or today in this lecture is I'm going to talk about organizational setup. I'm going to discuss legal needs of organizations, financial setup, which is a big component of any organization, startup, or company in general, and then marketing. Dot 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 again. Yes. Um, Again, this is a marketing-based course, but this day and age, no matter what your product or service or company is, a proper marketing channel and a proper marketing strategy is essential for any success whatsoever. Whether it's brand recognition or loyalty or kind of showcasing and differentiating your organization through marketing campaigns and leverage and kind of placement of the ads and placement of the products and services that you're rendering. But anyway, let's go ahead and just dive right in. So let's start with the organizational setup. Now, um, as you're embarking into the startup phase, right, you have to figure out exactly how you're going to organize your organization. So, how you're going to manage it and set it up. So, the things that you want to begin with before you start to kind of build out roles and responsibilities, etc., is setting up an established company mission and vision. As far as a mission's what your company's about, a vision's where your company is going. Okay, so the mission should be whatever I guess the characteristics or you hold high value in, whether that's ethical behavior, that's doing right with the customer, that's having great quality and expectations, whatever that is. And then there's a vision as far as the future and where the organization is going to go. Is this something you want to grow into Fortune 500? Is this something you want to eventually have an initial public offering and sell stock shares to? Is this something that you're, you know, uh, just wanting to do great things in the world and be humanitarian with it. Whatever the I guess the goal is, the end goal for the organization is what you kind of put into the vision of where you're going to be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. Once you satisfy that, there's going to be an outlining the actual organizational structure. All right, this is the actual infrastructure of how your organization will grow and how it's going to be set up, organized, and function in the beginning. Now, I'm going to go over a couple of the topographic setups in the next slide, so we'll go into a little more depth as far as the various organizational structures that you can use, but it is an essential and very key role in your organization because potentially for growth, expansion, and adjustment, and just for your own sanity, you want to make sure that you really set this up well for the future. That way you're not having pain points later on. With that organizational structure, you start to assign roles and responsibilities. This might be, if you want to, this is where you would enlist titles or give job names and roles and responsibilities to certain individuals. You dub somebody your CEO, your CFO, your CTO, your CIO. I know there's a lot of acronyms for executive positions or chief officer positions, but anyway, or VP, a president, registrar if you're a school, controller if you're doing something more project based. But essentially, you start to assign the roles, responsibilities, the titles, the hierarchy of how this is all going to work, and kind of like who's accountable for what, and start delegating the work out as need be. And then it goes in from planning for growth and expansion, which starts with the outlining of organizational structure. Like I said, you need to plan for growth. I mean, many startups that I've worked for in the past kind of like flew by the seat of their pants, so to speak, and they kind of built their organizations up, being successful quick, and then figuring out how to infrastructure it afterwards. And it creates a lot of pain points. It creates a lot of people getting promoted into leadership roles and management positions that really don't belong in there, and it can really hurt the overall corporate culture very quickly if you do it this way. and also you get people that shouldn't have power to be in powerful positions, and it's just never a good situation. Anyway, so a couple of the structures that you can play with or look into um, are on here. There's various ones and versions of these, but these four right here are kind of like the main staples that you can utilize and what ones that most organizations do use um, in the real world. All right, now there's the traditional hierarchical organization over here, right? This is your tried true pyramid-based structure. Not to be confused with pyramid scheme, even though it's kind of a funny play on words, but it's a pyramid structure. It's set up similar to militaries, to clergy, as far as churches, the governments, pretty much how kings and ruled in ancient times, and therefore not for like a hierarchical based structure has been around for thousands of years. All right, so it's not that it's a tried and true method; it's just a method that seems to be inherently pushed onto all of us over and over again as history keeps repeating itself. Anyway, but it goes for the simple fact that a few manage the many, and leadership at the top typically makes decisions that will affect the entire organization from the bottom up. Um, now, hierarchical organizations are very, very popular and normal in most Western organizations. The chances that you go into a hierarchical based organization are very high. I think it's probably around like 75 or 80% of organizations that operate in this manner. So be prepared for it. All right. They might talk about how they're flat or they're everyone's on the same page or whatever, but it's still a hierarchical. So it's still a hierarchical setup. So just be ready for that. Anyway, so hierarchies work this way, right? There's a single CEO, CFO, whatever the president, whatever the position is up top, right? And then this responsibilities, roles, power, they all start to delegate and kind of create this pyramid structure, that kind of chain of command, so to speak, that goes down. Now, typically in this type of organization, communication starts from the top up here and then trickles down through the rest, or communication does not usually go up. This organization is not set up for a very robust communication line between the frontline employees down here and the executives up top. It's very convoluted, and there's not any channels typically that match up to go back up here. If you notice, everything just kind of trickles down. It's a very easy structure to start with. It's a very easy structure to scale for organizations, and whenever you need to grow or expand, it's a very simple method of adding new departments, new employees, new managers, new roles. I mean, if this is, let's say hypothetically, this is the starting point of your company, and there's probably about like 20 people in this, but also you need 4 new teams. All you simply do is you add another one of these executives, you add 4 new managers, you add these people underneath it, and boom, and all of a sudden you just have created a bigger pyramid. It's a simpler way of setting it up. My only concern I will put onto you guys when you're creating an organizational structure, because I can go on for hours with this stuff because this is my forte, but the only issue that happens with these hierarchical-based positions and hierarchical-based setups is a lot of times these positions become either redundant or wasteful and the actual day-to-day operation. So what I'm saying is that these frontline employees down here typically are either client-facing, customer-facing, or doing the day-to-day grind for the blood of the organization, right? They're the ones actually churning and burning and bringing in whatever the revenue is, working with the customers, etc. They are the faces of the organization, and is in the customer and client's eyes. The people above them's job is to specifically manage these individuals underneath them to ensure that they're doing their jobs. They may or may not be active in the roles. They may or may not be actually helping or actually getting on the phones with clients and customers and aiding in this process, but they still have a hand in the direct influence and profitability of the organization, right? Now, what starts to get kind of murky as you get higher up is the more levels that you create between the executive branch up top and the more, I guess, mid-level managers and executives that kind of trickle through here, the less responsibility, accountability, and workload they actually have for the organization. So, like I said, just be careful because you want to make sure that everyone has meaningful work and that everybody is actually contributing to the bottom line and the success of the organization. And if you have positions that you can't actually know or correlate what they do to aid and process the day-to-day operation to be more effective, efficient, or they don't make work lives better for anybody, then you might want to reassess that position even existing, which that happens a lot in organizations. There's just made up positions. There's VP of Marketing Assets and Acquisitions. What does this person do? You probably have no idea. Neither do I. But when you start to investigate, you figure out that this person really doesn't do anything, and it's just a middle communication line between two different departments, or just a communication line up. And is that person really worth the $80,000 to $200,000 that you're potentially paying them? No, it's a huge wasteful expense. So anyway, but like I said, you just want to be careful with that. Now, the one to the right of it, as you're looking at the screen, and you see the big Steve Jobs there, right? Or as I like to call him, our newest version of Edison, our generation's Edison. If you get the reference, good for you. But anyway, uh, now Steve Jobs was a very, very interactive CEO that pretty much wanted his hand and communication lines into every single department possible. Like a traditional hierarchy, this person does not get involved typically in these other people's positions, jobs, responsibilities, communication lines, anything. This web structure over here, the CEO and his executive team, or the top level people of that organization, have a communication line in their hands in every single facet of the organization for a very quick understanding, jump in, relatability, communication line to that said part of the organization. Like I said, Steve Jobs was a control freak of a chair of a chief executive officer and president of Macintosh at the time, then turned into Apple that we know today. But for the most part, he was a control freak, and he wanted to know where everybody and anything was going on with the organization. He wasn't a hard micromanager, but he definitely wanted to know what everybody was doing in his organization and have a direct communication line and jump into departments when he wanted to make sure that the work and his vision was being rendered. And so the web structure of Apple was created, and that's what they use still today, even with Tim Cook as the head of Apple and as the CEO. Now, great structure, easy scalability. It's similar to a hierarchy base that there are still positions of power that oversee many, but the communication lines and setup for innovation is a bit higher. And it's also catered to as an executive team that wants to get a lot more involved in the day-to-day operation and the random accountability of the various departments. In a hierarchical-based structure, everyone stays in their lane and doesn't really involve everybody else when it comes to decision making or jumping in or figuring things out. Web structure is a lot more cooperative, a lot more communicative. All right, so just kind of get an idea, but it still has a hierarchical based essence to it. Now, to the bottom left, the flat organizations. This is pretty much the easiest way to set up a startup, and most entrepreneurs and startups start in this flat organization way. This pretty much means that every single person in this little convoluted circle has an individual job role and responsibility that may or may not tie into the person next to them. And honestly, they don't care. They're in their little tunnels of their workloads. This person's creating applications. This person over here is making marketing assets. This person's doing sales. They don't talk, they don't communicate, they don't really get in align with each other. But they have one single manager, typically you as the president, CEO, or whatever, owner, whatever you want to call yourself. Your job is to manage these random individuals that are going to be doing specific tasks for your organization that may or may not know anything about one another or even communicate with each other at any point in time. That's a flat organization. These could be a lot of contractors or vendors, but it's a very easy way to start because you don't have to build a hierarchy structure. You don't have to make titles. You have work that needs to get done, and you assign the work, and that's the end of the goal right there, right? Great, assign, seal, deliver. But the sad and crappy part about the flat organization is it does not scale very well. You have to think of it, these are each individuals doing a very specific task. If you have 5, 6, maybe 10 or 12 people, you can handle that, right? You can handle a dozen people doing a dozen different things, right? It's going to be stressful and it's going to be kind of a pain in the ass to make sure you're documenting and figuring all that stuff out, but it's doable, right? Now, what happens if you have 200, 100, you have 200, 250 employees now? Are you going to still be able to set that expectation of a flat organization where everyone's in their tunnel and just doing their workload and you're the end all be all and only person monitoring all this work? No, it's not feasible, it's ridiculous, and it never works. So flat organizations always turn into something else, whether it's a hierarchical, a flat hierarchical, which is pretty much the same thing. It can evolve into a web structure based on adding hierarchies and adding different various positions and assigning titles, delegation, and roles and responsibilities. And then the last method I always like to talk about, which most of you probably have never even heard of, is called a holacratic organization. Now, holacracy is a newer trend, um, developed and used in various certain companies in the United States. One of the biggest ones that I always did case studies on during my dissertation was Zappos, which was before they were purchased by Amazon. But the Zappos CEO and Zappos itself, which is a very large retailer and shoe distributor, they follow this holacratic model. Even after Amazon purchased them, they still follow this model here. Now, a holacracy is built on the essence that every single department is its own community, and it's a jobless, not jobless, but titleless organization. So nobody has a title, nobody has power over any said individual in the organization. No decisions are made without a consensus of either the company or the department that it's being affected by. And so you have a job role, you have responsibilities, and you have accountability that's set for yourself. But as far as like an actual boss, and like a vice president, an executive, anything of that nature, those titles do not exist within this organization. They look at the work as work, and that is it. All right. It's a very pure, nice way of doing it. It has its pros and cons when it comes to setup. I mean, a pro one is typically higher employee morale and less turnover in this type of setup because people are viewed as equals no matter what position or workload they do for the organization, and no decisions can be made or forced upon them without a democratic consensus decision being made. And the cool part about the holacratic model down here is that each one of these spheres, if you notice, they kind of overlap, right? That's because their job roles and responsibilities, or their depiction of what the organization is doing, it falls into other categories of affecting different parts of the organization. Now, this is where it gets fun and convoluted at the same time. So each one of these spheres manages themselves. So they delegate workloads, they assign accountability, they have a set work creation that they have to get done. They focus on that. If any decisions need to be made within the department, they will make that decision. They'll figure out what they need to do. They'll allocate and delegate the workload as it needs to. They'll stay late. They'll do whatever they need to, etc. Now, the convoluted but fun part is if any decision that has to be made by any one of these branches affects another branch or the company as a whole, then there has to be a consensus of the company as a whole if it affects that. Or if, let's say, if these two departments here and here are, one of them has to make a decision that will affect the day-to-day operations of the other, they all will have to meet and come up with a consensus-based decision. Sounds fun, right? Yeah. There's it's pros and, like I said, pros and cons. The pro is that everyone's going to be essentially involved in the decision-making process. The con is it might be a little lengthier of a decision-making process than it needs to be. Quick, decisive decisions are a little tougher in this model because typically the rules and the pay-to-play setup is that you have to have a consensus to make a group decision. Cool part though is that no matter where you work within the organization, if there's an executive bubble or there's an executive team branch that handles like vision, mission, and kind of like strategic planning based stuff, they can't make decisions that will affect the entire organization without the organizations and the people within these random departments say that that makes sense and it'll work well for them and come to a consensus for it. That's a really cool part and a really, really innovative part of organizational structures because many times in organizations, the top levels, especially in like a web or even in a hierarchical, they'll make decisions that they believe are in the best interest of the organization because on paper or from whoever's telling them, it looks like that. But they don't think about how it affects the day-to-day operation employees, the departments that are down here. And so a good decision on paper can end up being a catastrophe-based decision to your actual workforce and cause redundancies, issues, pushback, conflict, etc. So anyway, with that being said, these are the various ones that you can do. And like I said, there's versions of them. These aren't cut and dry like you have to follow these specific models. There's a mixed bag of how you can set up your organization. And the cool part about you being entrepreneurs or you starting your own organization is you can create the atmosphere, the setup, and the hierarchical based structure if you want it, or the holacratic based structure, the web or the flat. You create what your organizational structure is going to be, and you go from there. And however you set that mission and vision, and expectations for your company is how it's going to run. All right. So I think I've harped on that long enough. If any further questions, feel free to send them to me. All right, so now I'm going to take a kind of like an abrupt push into legal needs. All right, so organizational structure, I can just harp on and say that it's very important because for scalability, delegating work, accountability, and being effective and efficient at what you do. Now, legal needs is just as important. All right, if not possibly more, depending on your whatever department, whatever market or department that you're working in, or whatever your industry is, right? So, what I'm going to talk about today for legal needs is IP protections, designating your business, and making critical changes for your analysis. So, let's start with IP protections. IP simply just means intellectual property, and intellectual property, in a nutshell, quick and dirty abbreviation, is that you can anything that's thought, written, contextualized, that's your intellectual property. All right. Now, any ideas, anything you write, whatever, that's all considered IP or intellectual property. Now, once you come up with these ideas, or you come up with this strategy, or whatever you put to play, and you want to protect and put in protections on this, so nobody else can use your ideas or whatever you're creating, you have these various things to help you out. You have patents, provisional patents, trademarks, and copyrights. All right. So I'm going to go through these individually. So we've all probably heard the term patent, right? So a patent pretty much just assigns a legal rights by the U.S. Patent and Trade Office for said individual or entity to utilize a certain utility or design, agricultural, plant, and possible pharmaceutical. But I won't talk about those because that's very, very set industries and regulations. But for the most part, if you're going to go down the patent line, you're going to either do a utility or a design. Utility meaning an activation or an actual function of whatever you are creating product-wise, or a design meaning an actual look, feel, how it interconnects, how it snaps together. That would also be a way of patenting. And like an example I always like to put is that, like Lego, for instance, the way those blocks intertwine, that is a design patent, not a utility. It's a design patent because they designed their blocks to be that specific way. Now, just on a complete side note, so you know this, if you ever see things that look just like Legos now, it's because Lego does not actually have their patent anymore. Patents do have a shelf life, typically around 70 years or so, when they become what they know as common law or just a common occurrence. And then they become open, kind of like open season. So once Lego, because that's how old Lego is. But anyway, so Lego lost their patent rights because they're such an old company, but also an old patent that's common now. And so other companies started, like Crayola and a few others, started making pretty much like fake Legos. But up until I think like early 2000s, pretty much there was only Legos and nothing else, and you couldn't even remotely come close to making that design look like that without the patent protections kicking in for the Lego industry. Anyway, that's patent. Utility, design, it does something, it looks like something, right? That's patent. Now, the thing about patents are that they're very expensive and they can be very time consuming to get. All right, an average patent can range between anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000 depending on the complexity and exactly what you're trying to patent, right? That's a huge chunk of change, and not to mention a long duration of time, because it could take anywhere from a few months to a few years to actually get this thing pushed through. So with that kind of time frame and cost associated with putting that through, it doesn't always seem to be the most feasible thing for a small startup or a lean organization that's trying to push into a marketplace. Now, so with that being said, because patents became very expensive, convoluted, and long-winded at times, uh, and with the huge amount of tech and new things that are innovative all the time, especially in the technology, in the information technology field, etc. Provisional patents were created. Now, a provisional patent, it's fairly new in retrospect, but provisional patents are pretty much a preemptive patent right, saying that you're eventually going to go down the line of a full patent. So what a provisional patent does is it allows you to hold or protect an idea for up to 12 months. It gives you a full year of exclusivity to actually pursue a product that you're trying to, or design that you're trying to put out, right? So And these are typically a lot more expensive. The actual paperwork process for submitting is in like $300 something dollars, but you're going to want to have an attorney look over any of this material so that way it goes through faster. And so provisional patents typically only cost anywhere from 1,500 to 2 grand. So it's a significantly cheaper way of going around, a full-on patent, which could take, like I said, 10, 15, $20,000 and years to put through, as opposed to a provisional patent, which time frame typically is like 3 weeks to 90 days max, depending on the complexity and the severity of the provisional patent and how much back and forth legality-wise you have to go with them. But it gives you 12-month protection. You're allowed to re-up your provisional patent up to 3 times before you have to actually make a decision if you're going to abandon the patent and not do the actual full patent, or if you are going to pursue a full-on patent as opposed to just holding a provisional. So it gives you essentially to dibs, so to speak. It just gives you, I guess, exclusivity for a duration of time, and you can finagle it to up to 3 years to actually make that work. It's actually quite interesting and cool to do. Many companies go down that route in order for to protect them to push it through because, like I said, patents can be very expensive, convoluted, and long-winded. So provisional is a much faster, shorter, quicker, and a more exclusive way of getting things out there a lot faster. Now, you might have some random questions because I always, every time I talk about IP protection, I always get so many different questions. So I learn a lot of stuff as I research it myself. I'm not a patent attorney, but I can tell you this: if you're asking me about, if you're building a program, an application, anything of that nature, and you bring up the term software patent, because that is a thing, it does exist. I'm going to, myself and any intellectual property attorney out there is going to advise you to not go down that route because software patents are just as expensive, convoluted, long-winded, but the sad part is that they don't really offer much protection. It's more of a waste of money, so to speak, because any of you that have done programming or coding or understand languages of that sort, it's not very hard to write a program that will do exactly the same thing with minimal code changes. And with minimal code changes for a software patent, that is enough to make it its own unique coding line, which does not interfere with any type of, if the company has a software patent, you can get around it quite easily by changing a little bit of how the programming works or what language you use, and it's completely different at that point. So, yes, don't go down that line. There's no point. Um, and then, well, I'll talk a little bit into trademarks, and then I'll talk to some examples so you can completely understand what I'm talking about. So we get into trademark. Trademark, you'll see a few different. You'll see like a little TM on logos sometimes that trademark logo, or you'll see a little R with a circle. The little R with a circle means that you've applied for a trademark through the U.S. Patent and Trade Office. It's been accepted, and it becomes a registered trademark of whatever your company specifically is. Right? So if you see a little R on the logo, that means it's a registered trademark through the U.S. Patent and Trade Office. If you see a TM, then they usually have just applied for that ability to actually do the trademark, or they've just been using it so long that they've been given permission to utilize the TM logo because they didn't feel like they had to go down the registration. I know it can be a little confusing, but anyway. Trademarks, fairly simple. It costs anywhere from $200 to $300 to get. You do not need an attorney to help you out with the trademark. You pretty much just create the logo, slogan, or whatever you're putting together. You submit it to their office. They're going to look it over and ensure that it doesn't infringe or look too similar to other trademarks out there. And then they'll give you an approval, or they'll send it back and ask for revisions based on that portion of it. All right. Now, the only caveat to trademarks is they have to actively be in use. All right. You can't just decide that you have a bunch of cool logos you like and decide to trademark them. Trademarks are exclusive to businesses and companies and people that are actually in operation. So it has to actually be tied to some kind of organization of some sort that's actually in business and functioning. So, like Blockbuster trademark doesn't exist. Like companies that have gone under, their trademarks they don't have rights to their trademarks anymore if they're not actually functioning. If these are companies that are completely gone, their logos are pretty much fair game to do whatever they want with because they don't own trademarks because they're not actively doing any type of commerce or business at that point. All right. Anyway, and then the last one is copyright. Copyright has its own office because it's one of the oldest methods of intellectual property in our entire country's existence. So copyrights is pretty much music, written works, drawings, anything of that nature, songs, all that stuff is copywritten. Any artistic-based measure is usually down the copyright office, which, like I said, it's its own entity. The Copyright Office of the U.S. is its own entity. It's not tied to the U.S. and Patent and Trade Office in any way, shape, or form, and copyrights are just done through there. But the way you handle copyrights is you submit your body of work. It's fairly cheap to do. I think it's like a few $100s max to actually get a copyright. Um, but it's going to take some time because they do actually go through, line by line, verbatim, and read through everything to make sure that there's not passages or portions of your writing that match up to another copywritten section of something else too much. And if there is if there is sections that are deemed, potential plagiarism or potential, overlay of another copyright, then they'll ask you to make revisions and changes to it. So make sure you're careful with that. I mean, if you write a book that's exactly like Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone and submit it to the Copyright Office, it's most likely going to get rejected for being too similar to the Harry Potter book. It's more than just changing a name or title and a bunch of other stuff. Like they go into really, really specific details. Same with songs. Like there's only a certain amount of bars or lyrics that you can utilize before it becomes infringement, and you're going to owe whoever owns that copyright either royalties or they're going to hit you with a cease and desist, and you're going to stop doing what you're doing. Anyway, okay, so back to what I was talking about before as far as like software patents and protection. So the example I always like to use is Lyft and Uber, right? These are applications that are essentially exactly the same, right? They're both geocaching-based applications that use a social demographic and contract set up to find you a ride, share a ride with a set individual that's going to take you from point A to point B, right? So if you start to kind of dig through that, I guarantee you that Lyft and Uber use very similar codes, languages, and setups, but I guarantee that they're different in some way, shape, or form, and they're not exact. It could be certain functionalities, certain button pushings. I'll be honest, I haven't used both of them enough to even really remotely know the difference as far as user interface. But the key difference between the two is that they both have their own trademarks on their logos, their names, their emblems, their color schemes, all that stuff. That's the main protector of their organization. They can't copyright, they can't trademark, and they can't patent the way that their application functions because it's programming based. And like I was telling you before, it's not very hard to program around something to do a function very similar to another application or another program and to avoid infringement. If you guys ever had to in your earlier years, or if you're old enough, you might have remembered a software called OpenOffice, which pretty much mimicked, and was exactly like Microsoft Word. Functioned the same way, still was a word processor. You could even open Word documents within OpenOffice. It was a very cheap workaround for people that wanted to have a word processor, Excel, and it made a version of almost every Microsoft Office product that was out there. Now, I'm not sure if they still exist, but they were not, you would think that Microsoft would like cease and desist them, infringe them, etc. Microsoft really had no legs to do anything with them. They tried to attack them on infringement of their trademark or color scheme of their setup because they said they were trying to make them too much look like their Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel and PowerPoint icons. But for the most part, they really couldn't do anything to stop that organization or that company from releasing this free software um, for people to utilize. And so, and it, yeah. Anyway, long story short, like I said, software patents are trash. Don't ever go down that path. You can't protect coding, programming. It's not going to be a very effective thing. Okay. Now, if you make a design to go with it, or you have a company that's, you could trademark that, and you can push that. If you have any type of trade secrets or algorithms or artificial intelligence, I guess machine learning assembly lines that you potentially trademark and write, you can do that. But that's a whole different conversation that we can have in a different point in time. Hopefully, I'm not just confusing you. Anyway, with honesty, IP law and restrictions can get very confusing and crazy at times. But for the most part, Anyway, long story short, software patents, not a real thing. Don't push it and go from there. Trademark everything you need to. Another question I always get, and I always like to cover as well, is people ask about like video games, because I'm sure many of you are game majors, so you're going to ask me the question of like, well, how do I protect, my video game? If I create a game, how do I do that? And I'm going to tell you the same thing that's happened since the 80s, when video games, actually late 70s and 80s, when video games were first utilized and not so much invented, but actually became mainstream. Now, you can't, as a game maker, like I said, the software programming that goes behind it, you can't patent and protect that and own it. All right. So if that was the case, like Mario Brothers, Nintendo, when they made Super Mario Brothers, that would have been the only side-scrolling game ever, and nobody else would have been able to duplicate or do anything remotely even close to that. So that's not the case, is it? Like Nintendo was built on side scrollers. So I don't even know if you took that out, you would have a very huge cutoff of games or runoff of games that didn't exist in that case. But anyway, so with that being said, now you're going to ask me like, okay, well they can't patent or protect the functionality of the game or how it operates. So then, how does Nintendo and Super Mario Brothers protect themselves from having someone make a game that looks and feels exactly like that? This is what they do. They copyright and they trademark every single image, emblem, logo, digital art, pixel art that's in there. All right, pixelated Mario, that's copyrighted. Pixelated turtles, those are protected. Pixelated tubes, castles, whatever, those are all copyrighted. And so, if you were to make a game that resembles or has similarities to any of their pixelated art or any of their artwork in general that's copywritten, then they can hit you with a cease and desist. An example I always like to talk about, if you guys remember, there was an application called Flappy Birds a while back that caused hysteria. But it was pretty much a knockoff of Super Mario Brothers, right? It was a game that they pretty much changed the main character into looking into that didn't look like Mario, but it's had the same jumping functionality, the same power ups, the same kind of feel, play, and workaround. And it was an application based or game, so not a 16-bit. I'm sorry, 8-bit or 16-bit game that Mario was originally built off of. It was an application that you can download onto your phone. Now, um, it looked and feel like I said, it looked, felt, and resembled Super Mario, the old school Super Mario Brothers, very, very closely. And the way that the Nintendo was able to pretty much cause this company to cease and desist, and so they could not kind of knock off their games, is they were able to show that the tubes that they used for the gameplay were very similar, if not almost exactly the same as their Mario Brothers platform. And so with that, they were able to hook a cease and desist, and the application folded because it wasn't really built off anything strong, and they weren't going to get into a legal battle with Nintendo, right? So anyway, but that's just a caveat that I just want to share with you, is that if you're going to build games or any type of setup programming wise, you copyright and trademark all the assets that go along with that, because you don't want anybody, like the gameplay, people are going to can duplicate that, all right? We all see it. There's genres of games, right? If we were able to patent genres, there would only be like a handful of video games, period, that we would have to play over and over again. It would be terrible. But so gameplay we can't patent or protect or set up, but asset creation, character builds, and those kind of platforms, environmental setups, those things can be protected through copyright laws and potentially trademark if it's like the logo you use for your actual marketing pieces and game feature. All right, so harped a lot onto that stuff. Hopefully, I gave you some kind of information. Not hopefully, I didn't confuse you during this whole context of protecting your product and service. Now, the other legal right I want to talk about goes into the designation of your business. All right, designation of your business is pretty much like labeling it what it is. And I know you're thinking like, oh, it's an organization. Yes, it's a company. It's an organization. Yay. But under tax laws, there are specific uh, ways of designating your business for how it's going to operate and how it's going to be taxed and function, right? All right, so the first one I always talk about is sole proprietorship. Sole proprietorship is pretty much the most abundant form of business ownership in the nation. And sole proprietorship pretty much is as easy as you opening up shop, starting a business today. I'm starting my business. I'm a sole proprietor. And you start right from there. All right. Then there gets into what they call partnerships, which are general limited. Like you can have a 50-50 partnership, you can have a 70-30, you can have a limited partnership, which means that the liability, one person may be the financier, but has almost no liability to the organization besides the money that they invest into it, a silent partner, so to speak. And it goes that way as far as liability is concerned. And of course, like with the percentages, one said party is more liable than the other for the organization. A sole proprietor typically is one person or a married couple, and they have full liability of that organization. Meaning, when you're filing your taxes as a sole proprietor, all the income, expenses, everything tied to that organization is tied to you as well. So, your car that you own, that's part of the business now. The home that you own, that's part of the business now. Everything is one in a sole proprietorship. Partnership, it's still the same way as like a sole proprietorship, but the only difference is that now it's a shared liability. So instead of just your stuff, you and your partner's stuff is both tied into the business as well. Yay, right? Okay. So I hope that doesn't scare you, but it should a little bit, because if you're doing a business that's your livelihood, or you're starting to have a lot of customer base, if there's any way, shape, or form that you could be held legally liable for anything that would cause you to lose everything, then you might want to look at differentiating yourself from it, which I'll talk about in a sec. Then there's corporation, all right, which we've always heard the evil term corporation, and for the most part it's very fitting. But there's S and C corporations. S just means stock issuing. They sell stock in their organization, typically in like initial public offering. They're on a stock exchange. They sell percentages of their company to the public for purchase. And then there's a C corporation, which is not that, right? so, corporation works this way. Corporations are technically, under tax law and legality wise, a person, right? They don't have a social security card, but they do have their individual tax number that we all have as individuals who file taxes. They have an EIN number, right? So, which is weird to think about. But they also have rights, and a corporation can be held liable for damages, being sued, criminal charges, etc. Which is kind of weird because they're not a real person, but they are treated that way when a corporation is deemed. So companies like to use corporations because it separates the business owners and the board that actually oversees it from any wrongdoing or liability if that company, that said corporation, was to go under, to be under investigation, to have any problems. None of that's going to affect the actual owners of the organization. So that's cool, right? The liability is kind of less. The thing about a corporation is you have to assign a board of directors that are not the owners, right? So you have to assign certain people to roles within making decisions for the vision of the organization. This board is labeled out and sent into the federal agency that oversees corporations, and when you put your information into it, and typically corporations are created at the state level, so it will be some state piece of paperwork that goes in, and you'll pay federal and state taxes based off the corporation's tax rate, which is typically significantly lower than ours as people and sole proprietors. But anyway, uh, but corporations do cost money. You have to pay a certain fee in order to get in there, and then there's going to be a continuance fee, typically quarterly, semi-annually, and then even annually, depending on the state, for actually re-upping the corporation, making it work. So there's a pretty high cost and paperwork process associated with setting up and having a corporation. So typically, more larger firms that have pretty robust legal firms go down this route of corporation setting for the differentiating. But like I said, it can protect pretty much anybody that's tied in the organization, and the only way that they can be tied to wrongdoing is if they had personal knowledge or were the culprits of the act themselves. So if you're an owner of a corporation and your corporation goes bankrupt, you're fine. They're not coming after you for money. They're not going after your home or your car. They're just going after the corporation itself is going to have to go belly up, and whatever assets are in the corporation's name, because the corporation can have a credit line, corporation can own property, corporation can own things, and they'll liquidate that and take it from there. But you, as a said owner of the corporation, will have no financial liability of your own personal assets and finances. So they're not going to raid your bank account, they're not going to take your car, none of that. If you were a sole proprietor, they have the ability to do that. That's the scary part, and that's why I always typically advise for some kind of protections. But I know you're going to ask me, you're like, oh my God, if I start my own business, right, I can't afford and I don't have a robust legal department to set up an S or C corporation. That's ridiculous. You're right. So what they did, and I'll skip over nonprofit for a second, is they created an LLC, limited liability company, right? So a limited liability company, depending on your state, is actually very simple to apply for. Here in Arizona, it costs about $80, and it'll probably take you at the most half an hour to go through the paperwork process for it. All right. It's so step by step and easy to put through, it's ridiculous. And what you end up doing is a limited liability company gives you most of the protections that a corporation would, but it allows you to file taxes as simple as you would as a sole proprietorship. All right, so now you're probably a little more confused. So corporations themselves, if you deem a company as a corporation, they have to file their own taxes specifically for the corporation. If you're a sole proprietor, you file your taxes as an individual, and the business assets, expenses, write-offs are all tied to your taxes as well. A limited liability company mashes those two things together and allows you as an individual to also take the write-offs, also take any of the, I guess, the positives of being a sole proprietor on your own individual taxes. So you can write off things like your gas if you have to use your car for business purposes. You can write off a portion of your home, an electric bill, because you have to, if you have a home office that you work out of and have customers and clientele either come to there or you work through there, that's mode and that's where you do your work. So you have that ability. It's really cool. Typically, you don't even need to file any additional forms. If you do have like a pretty extensive limited liability company that's doing quite well, then you have two options. You can either, you can actually apply for an EIN number, and you can have the limited liability company assign its own taxes and do it that way. Or you can just do a Form C, as they call it, and attach it to your own 1040s, and you can file it that way. Now, I might be confusing you or just boring you with these tax information questions, but I'm sure some of you down the line will ask me questions about it if you decide to go down that path. And if any of you want to actually set up your LLC while you're in school, I do it all the time. And I walk the students through it. I have a very easy email to kind of take you through that process as well. Like I said, it's very easy and painless here in Arizona to do. The only rule and regulation for setting up a limited liability company in Arizona is that the actual company's address, the headquarter office has to be in Arizona to set up an Arizona-based LLC. And every state works that way. And same with corporations, sole proprietorships, partnerships, nonprofits, whatever. They all are going to be designated through the state, and it's the state that the company is headquartered in. So even if you have satellites all over the world, all over the country, or you do most of your business in California, but your main hub and headquartered in Nebraska, that's where you're going to be. All right, that's just how it's going to be. And so you pay taxes for that and that alone, and that's who you sign your paperwork to, and that's who you have to re-up or allocate resources to for wherever home state is, not for every other state that you're functioning out of. All right. Okay. So now back to nonprofits. Nonprofit is pretty much how I can just explain it in its name. It's a nonprofit. The main goal of a nonprofit is it has to be tied to some kind of humanitarian and bettering of mankind work. Right? That's a very ambiguous thing, right? I know. So nonprofits have their place, and so you can see a lot of either, I don't want to say shady organizations claiming to be nonprofits, as I always like to point out Goodwill. That doesn't make sense to me. I can go on. I don't want to rant too much, but it kind of grinds my gears, so to speak, that like Goodwill is considered a nonprofit, even though they 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 have their inventory is free. You donate this stuff and you get a voucher back for tax write-offs, which never go anywhere, because let me just let you know, because I know enough about taxes to be dangerous. Unless you're donating like hundreds of thousands of dollars, or at least in the past $20,000 to $30,000 worth of stuff, unless you're donating that amount of money into anything, you get no in tax incentive or write-off for anything. So if you donate your couch, a TV, and some clothes, they're going to give you this write-off voucher, and they're going to be like, oh, here, you can use this for your taxes. You will get nothing back for that, okay? Because that's nowhere near the dollar amount that you have to put forward that the government's going to ever give you any type of money back for it. So that's my first issue with that. Two, they take your stuff and they sell it, right? They take the stuff that you give them free inventory, they sell it in their stores for a profit, and then what do they do with it? Now, the only rule for a nonprofit is at the end of the year, they cannot have an actual profit. All the money that's brought in has to be spent, right? That's the rule. That's the main thing for nonprofits. When they're called nonprofits, is because at the end of the year, they're not supposed to have any profit. Their balance sheet has to show zero. They have to spend everything they earn. So how do they do that? They can do it whatever way they want. The only rules and regulations against nonprofits is they can't pay out bonuses, they can't pay out to their board of directors, and they can't give out any type of incentives or gifts to their organization people. So what can they do? They can raise salaries. They can they can buy new assets. They can do things of that nature as long as they're tied to the business. And that's how it works. They can buy company cars. They can buy company jets if they can show the need for it. They can create a whole new stadium like many colleges do. Uh, but in essence, you just have to have, and at the end of the year, no profit. And so that's the main rule. So now it's very easy to bash nonprofits because there's many out there that take advantage of the system. But there's a lot of great humanitarian work that comes out of them as well. Are you most likely going to set up a nonprofit? Maybe, probably most likely not. If you're looking for something that's going to be your longevity or your, uh, I guess, livelihood as far as money making, nonprofit's not always the best route to go. Now, I'm not saying that you can't make a good living running and operating a nonprofit, but I'm saying that that's not really how they're started. and, and so the Red Cross was not started with the goal of making money, even though now the CEO probably makes anywhere from $4 to $6 million a year. Anyway, it's just my 2 cents. All right, so back to it. Now, the last one is doing business as. DB or DBA, not to be confused with a Doctor of Business Administration. All right, doing business as it has no legal protections, rights, or privileges to it. All of doing business as is allows companies to change the name of whatever the organization is that's running. Now, you might be giving me like a weird look, like why would anyone want to do that? This typically works for parent companies' subsidiaries. Okay, so there's organizations out there like umbrella-based companies, not to be confused with the Umbrella Corporation, which is a great reference to it. But you have entities like I'll just use like one of the Phoenix-based ones. Like many of us have seen the ads or know of the school called University of Phoenix, right? Well, University of Phoenix is actually owned or was owned by a parent company or an umbrella company called Apollo Group by the Sperling brothers here in Arizona. Apollo Group owned and operated University of Phoenix, but they kept it as a separate entity that ran itself. It had its own president, it had its own vice president, it had its own chain of command. It did not take orders or reflect through Apollo Group in any way, shape, or form. It owned and but it still was owned and I guess chimed up to Apollo Group under the umbrella of the organization. Now, if you worked for said University of Phoenix, when you got your paychecks, you got your W-2s, or any documentation that came to you as an employee, it would say Apollo Group doing business as University of Phoenix because technically the company was owned by another organization. I hope that makes sense. So uh, typically doing business as is just a naming recognition for a company that wants to be called something different than what it actually is. So if you have a parent company that owns like 6 or 7 different subsidies, they don't want their subsidies called the same name as the parent company. They want the subsidies to have their own doing business as title, and it goes that way. And the only reason that there is documentation or a designation for it is because there has to be some kind of paperwork or trail or some kind of link um, to the organizations that are calling themselves a different name but are still operating under one said umbrella corporation type organization. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. You have these are the different areas that you can go for. With all honesty, most business owners typically go for sole proprietorships or limited liability companies or LLCs. That's probably the route you're going to go if you go down that path. All right, Bear with me I've been talking a lot, but trust me, this is good stuff. Financial setup. So financial setup is a very, very important thing. This is how you're going to finance your venture, your startup, correct? All right, so first we start with a detailed cost breakdown and estimates. You have to know exactly how much your product, your service, your company is going to cost to actually get this thing going, get it off the ground. Because with that number, that's where you're going to go into the next portion of the financial options. You need to establish what vendors or contracts you're going to need to actually get this going. You're going to need to set up either manufacturing ties. If you're doing a product, you're going to need to set up whatever legal-based stuff if it's going to work there. You have to make sure you have that. You establish a very firm overall startup cost, all right? Because cost breakdowns and estimates are great, but you have to have a very firm startup cost. You have this goes in everything. This is gonna churn in labor costs. This is gonna churn in electricity and utilities and internet and whatever else is associated with the organization for the startup of that company. All right. Make sure you have a very firm set number and that you can back it with data and a good breakdown of the estimates. And then last, you need to have some kind of investor pitch or crowdfunding incentive set up to entice investments in one way, shape, or form. And I'm going to talk about crowdfunding in the next one because I don't condone that as your main source of financing because it's very not that way. But anyway, but creating investor pitch is essential because no matter if you're not funding this yourself in any way, shape, or form, if you're not the one actually backing this, whether you go through a bank, whether you go through investors or angel investors, venture capitalists, whatever, even a crowdfunding based setup, you need to have some kind of pitch and hook to get people interested in you and your product and service, right? Even if you have the greatest product and service ever, unless you position it, speak to it well, you're not going to really get much leverage and get people to buy into it, all right? Without a good hook, without a good pitch, without a good kind of speaking to go with the need that's there, many people are going to just look at it as a moot point and not go from there, all right? Now, when you get to the stage of like you set up your firm costs, you figured out your game plan, you know where you're going to go with this, right? Then it comes into the financial actual options. And the options I'm going to talk about are here. There's self-finance, which is just as coming out of your own pocket. This is using your retirement. This is using your own credit cards. This is taking money out of your savings account if you have it. Whatever. This is you backing your own organization to start up. That's self-financing. Very easy. Taking on partners. This is setting up a partnership of based percentages. Somebody's buying in a certain percentage to gain leverage into the company. Let's say, like Shark Tank's a good example because Shark Tank, they're not angel investors, they're not venture capitalists. They are essentially establishing partnerships on that show. And if you haven't watched that show, people pitch ideas, and the sharks are like Mark Cuban and the rest of the group that's there. They either say they're going to give a percentage, they're going to give them a certain dollar amount for a certain percentage of the organization, essentially becoming partners. Even though they deem the show to be like these are investors, they're not. They're becoming partners. Anyway, uh, so partners have a stake in the organization, so you can offer, I need $100,000 and I'll give you, half my company. Like you become a full-on partner, or I need $2 million and I'll give you 30% of the organization. Meaning I still want to have major stake in the company, but you're going to have a pretty significant stake into it as well for the amount of money that you're putting in. That you can take on either one partner, multiple partners, conglomerates of partners, whatever. There's business loans, all right, either through small business association or just general banks asking for loans. They're a little tougher to get, with all honesty. A traditional business loan, usually they want to see a track record of success, assets, and tangible things that they could potentially liquidate if need be to make their money back. Because it is just like a loan. It's like a car loan. It's like it's going to be a note that you're going to have to pay back with interest, and it typically starts with after a grace period, and you have to start making payments on it, right? So there's a business loan. SBA or Small Business Association loans are a little bit easier of use, and they might use more. They are going to still look through your numbers and make sure everything makes sense, and that you're not going too robust or biting more off than you can chew, so to speak. All right. Then there's angel investors, venture capitalists, which are the most ideal to get and go with, but there can be some of the hardest ones to actually reel in to get for your company to work with if you don't have a track record. So angel investors, venture capitalists, they are specifically investing into an organization or your company because they want a monetary return. All right, they do not want a percentage of your organization. They do not want to partner with you. They simply want to put money in and be able to take a percentage out, similar to like how stocks work, or if you're buying stock from a company, you buy a percentage. Well, that's actually slightly partnership, but whenever you put money into an organization through stock, you're hoping for a rate of return on your investment. That's what they want. So when they actually give you, let's say if they give you $100,000 to start your organization or to help you with the startup costs and funding of this, they're gonna expect a certain rate of return and a timeline on that rate of return based on that amount. That can be 20%, it can be 30%, it can be 50%, it can be 100% depending on the setup you have with that specific investor or venture capitalist. But the one thing I can tell you with 100% confidence, if an angel investor or venture capitalist gets involved with your organization, they do have a timetable and a timeline of not being there. Neither one of these groups want to be attached to your organization forever. 3, 5, maybe 10 years max, depending on the the group or the angel investor or the venture capitalist themselves. But they're looking for a rate of return and to move on. And so they're great because you can lean on them. They have tons of industry connections. They want you to be successful because they want their rate of return. They want their 30%. They want their 20%. And the faster you get there, the faster they get paid, right? And so they want that success. So that's a way of doing it that way. There's crowdfunding, which has become very popular. This is the Kickstarters, Indiegogos, the GoFundMe's, the whatever, 100 sites out there that are that crowdfund. Thing about crowdfunding, a great marketing ploy, great platform to showcase your products, your prototypes, and your services. It is not going to be the mode that you finance your entire backing of the organization. All right, whenever you see those ads for Kickstarter or those various crowdfunding sites that have success rates and they show off that this company came from us and this company came from that company had a prototype. That company already had the startup financing set up to do the R&D or the creation. They might have wanted the crowdfunding source for a little additional capital for marketing purposes or for pre-orders or to kind of put them a little bit higher up in the ranks so they didn't have to take on additional partners. But they were pretty much established organizations, right? Think about it, because if any of you have ever invested into a Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or something, you're not going to just, it's not just an idea. You want to see, typically you see the schematics, you see the blueprints, you see the product actually functioning, you see a cool commercial, you see like a lot of stuff that goes into it to entice investors to purchase into it, because you in a crowdfunding source is technically an investor. So you want to make sure that you have that caveat to it. The only thing I can tell you also to be weary of is, Kickstarter doesn't do that, Indiegogo doesn't do it, but some of the sites can be kind of shady, and if you don't hit a certain dollar amount, they might either keep the funding that came in, or as far as like the percentages that they take from you actually going on there might be kind of robust and high. So you want to make sure that you're kind of picking the right ones and going from there. And then last but not least, grants. I always talk about it, but I don't really put much weight into grants as far as financing an organization. Grants are great if you can get them. There's hundreds of them out there. There's a very lengthy paperwork and wordy process to apply for these things, and there's no consistency if you're going to get them or not. So you can definitely not hang your hat on getting a grant to start your organization. It's great if you do get one, but the chances are slim, and they might even come with stipulations. Some grants will ask you to give up portions of your intellectual property in order for them to get it. And at that point, is it even worth it? Maybe, maybe not. But like I said, and then grants aren't funded instantly. Even if you get a grant accepted, it can take months for it to actually be backed, and then hopefully the money's even there, depending on the agency or entity that actually is fronting the grant. So take that with a grain of salt. All right, so we're gonna bring it back to market research, and then I'll bring it home for you guys because I definitely longer lecture than I typically do. But so market research, the key things you want to look at for market research, because I've harped enough on marketing with you guys, is marketing research has to reflect the crowd and the audience that you're looking for. So key things you want to watch out for whenever you're doing research is population shifts, okay? If you're in a certain region, a certain area, you want to keep in mind, people moving, shifting, and the economic state of the local economic situation that's there. Besides that, legal and regulatory changes as well. This can be state, federal, or if you're working in a marketplace or an industry that's highly regulated or has very specific laws and regulations in it, you want to make sure you monitor that very, very closely. Because let's say if you're working in the medical field, you have HIPAA requirements, you have a bunch of other things that go along with it, and then those requirements and regulatory changes on an annual basis, and you have to keep up with it. Because a simple adjustment that you don't make can either fine you out of existence, or it can significantly hurt you and bring you up for legality reasons. All right. And I already talk about local economic situations because if you're opening a retail stop, let's say if you're opening like a storefront, you're not going to pick a failing economic situation to go into. All right. So you're not going to take a failing city or a city that's in turmoil or something of that nature and open a store in there because that's not really the most opportune way of doing it. Uh, Also, when it comes to market research, knowing your customer base is going for the most viewable materials to your actual customers. So if you're making a video game, for instance, you're not gonna go on traditional TV. You're not gonna put on like Fox News. You're not gonna put on CNN for a video game ad, right? That's not gonna hit your most viewable material for your customers. You're gonna go on gamer sites. You're gonna go on gamer blogs. You're gonna go on different discords and things of that nature that match up to your sequencing. And you're gonna buy ad space in like gaming conferences and things like that. That's your crowd. That's who you're going after, right? So you want to make sure that your viewable material is where it needs to be for the customers. And then also when it comes to ad creation and really like honing it in as you're doing it this week, what's important to the customer? Like what is it that's drawing the customer in? Is it something that's lighthearted? Is it something that differentiates? Is it because it's the best? You utilize that to build out your ad space, and that's what you're going to utilize when you actually are pushing out to your most viewable areas for your customer base. And then last but not least, brand and logo emphasis as far as how you're going to portray your brand and logo to really give that image or really, I guess, burn that image and exquisitely into someone's head as far as like logo. This entire class we've been harping on like good ads, logos that stick. Any one of us can think, maybe not off the top of our head, we might have to think for a second, but any one of us can pretty much on any given note just spout out 10 brands or logos immediately. Or if I showed you a bunch of different logos, typically you could tell, especially if they were pretty like high-end logo brands, you could pretty much tell me exactly what that company was when I showed it to you. And that's where you want to kind of get to. You want a very, very noticeable and very, very um, differentiated but recognizable brand and logo emphasis. So that way when a company, or not a company, but a person, a client, a customer, potential customer, client sees your brand or logo, they know exactly what that is. And so that's part of the market research that goes into it. Now, I'm going to kind of talk really quick about bringing it to market, and then we'll call it a day. Now, bring it to market, which we'll harp on, which I'll talk more about in the following weeks. There's ways of doing this. One of the fun ones I always talk about is like leaked information. Like Marvel has a great way of doing like the leaked footage of their films. There's no leaked footage, all right? I keep putting in quotes because somebody in their marketing department specifically put that out there for a reason, right? Because they wanted to generate buzz, hysteria, and try to draw interest to it. Um, Doing something unusual is also good too. Do something unusual and memorable. I mean, you can always do the whole, typical car dealership, car wash, wavy tube, inflatable arm man or giant gorilla, but that's not anything unusual that people are going to be like flocking to, right? It's pretty ridiculous and redundant. So you want to kind of figure out and do something unusual. Many of the ads that you guys showcased in the discussions and in your assignments did something kind of outside of the norm of their industry. They used extensive humor. They did something that was very, I guess, human rights oriented. They did something that was very controversial. They do these things on purpose to kind of draw in the crowd and to differentiate from their marketplace because sometimes that's the only way of getting noticed. And then the other thing I want to talk about is like getting partners involved. Anyone who has a stake in your organization, angel investors, banks, venture capitalists, financial partners, family and friends, whatever. Anyone who has a stake in your organization, get them involved in getting the word out and trying to elaborate and make the launch of your product or service even better. Leverage every relationship you have in order to make yourself successful when it comes to this because you only get one shot at this bringing it to market stage. This kind of like openings ceremony, so to speak, and you want to make sure that it sticks and you do a really good job with it. Now, the expectations when it comes to launching or bringing to market is you can't always expect a giant big bang release, right? You can't expect to sell a million copies of something. You can't expect a million people to come to your doors when you do that. But you want to be prepared for the best and also be prepared for the worst. You hope for the best and prepare for the worst. You keep the release rolling. So even though, like say, your initial launch didn't go as robust as you want to, you still keep churning and burning. You still keep marketing. You still keep pushing. You use customer reviews. You do whatever you need to kind of keep that release going. You offer promotions, etc. Whatever it needs to do to kind of keep that excitement around your company, product, and service there. And then never stop making iterations and changes to it. All right. You don't just make a product or service and you call it done. All right. You're not making Q-tips. You're not making cotton swabs. Like, you always have to make adjustments to make things better. And that's the day and age that we are in. And then last slide, and we'll call it a night, is the goals for a launch. Do something memorable, reaching the most amount of target audience in a given time, getting the product in the hands of people that can influence others. Bloggers, YouTubers, God, I hate using those people, but they can influence many people. If you can get it in the hands of celebrities, the Cardi B's of the world that have, I'm not going to say no talent because it's my personal opinion, but people that love these individuals and follow them excessively, and they can really influence people into buying, into making decisions. And so, definitely getting the products in hands of those individuals can really, really game change your organization and your company as a whole. And then make it easy for people to learn about your products. So have a very informative website, have a nice looking website, have information pertinent on all social media platforms. Make sure they're all professional, make sure they all correlate, and make sure they're all similar. Because you don't want huge differentiating between your media outlets. You want everything to look similar, the same, and the same user experience no matter how the product or how the person is learning about your company. And then ignore any non-essentials details to launch. If you're catering a launch and the sandwiches are turkey and not ham, is it really the end of the world? No, you shouldn't care. Don't get caught up on that. The balloons are deflated too fast. They're not. They're red and not blue. Whatever. These are non-essential things to your launch. The essential things to your launch is that your security system's up, or that your doors are opening, or that there's no glitches in your game or your software. Those are essentials. So focus on those things and not the others, and let everything go to the wayside. But with that being said, that's enough for today's lecture. I hope you took away a good amount as far as like legality, finance, and organizational structure. And if you need anything further, let me know. But I'm looking forward to seeing your guys' ads further on this week.